So for Mother's Day, Reverend Lisa's cousin, Diane Salkovich, gave a touching sermon about her mother. While sitting there, Spirit told me that my dad deserved his own touching tribute. Actually, I think my dad was one of the people telling me that. And so I needed to share with the congregation lessons from his life. So here we go. And speaking of him doing that, he's been with me since Tuesday, so that's part of why I'm screwing up the principles, because I had to tell him to back off a little. Robert Allen Shaw was born on April 13th, 1926, and passed away on August 2nd, 2005. Except for his time in the Army during World War II, he lived his entire life in southeast Michigan. He was born and raised in the Brightmoor neighborhood on Detroit's west side. After he got back from the war, he met and married Elizabeth Jane Shaw, who lived 2 blocks south of him on the same street in Brightmoor. So my mom's married name was Elizabeth Jane Shaw. Every time that I get asked for my mother's maiden name, I have to declare that they weren't related to protect the family. And they weren't. My brother did the genealogy going back 8 generations, just to make sure. My mom's side might be, Welsh coal miners, which that one of the categories of hillbillies is from Welsh coal miners, but at least we weren't inbred. My dad spent summers and weekends in the spring and fall, summers and weekends in spring and fall, working at his uncle's farms in the Thumb area. 2 of them had farms. And his cousins, back in the 80s, when the state fair was still there, they had award-winning pigs and cows. Anyway, that's the kids of those uncles. So he extended that hobby of farming to he and my mom's second home that he, his brother, and his father built in Livonia, Michigan on 1.5 acres. At first, we had a quarter-acre vegetable garden. It was huge. And a quarter-acre garden of corn for popping, which is a different breed of corn than corn for eating at the table. Because my dad loved popcorn. That's a story you can ask me about at fellowship, because Tuesday when I was here for the meditation, they usually start giving me stuff for if I'm working on Sunday, and they gave me so many stories, we'd be here for an hour. So that's a story, popcorn's a story for later, and that's why it was one of the jokes. So I got my love of gardening from my father. I'm not big on growing vegetables, they're a lot of work, but I have started growing a couple tomato plants the last 2 years. Nothing like a fresh, sweet tomato. In the stores, you don't get sweet tomatoes much. Now, on the other hand, I love flower gardens. And that's because we had border flower gardens on our backyard, which was another quarter acre. Long. And my siblings and I were responsible for keeping those gardens and the vegetable garden free of weeds all summer long. So every week, because the vegetable garden grew a lot more weeds than it did produce, let me tell you. And doing all that weeding, it's amazing that I still love flower gardens. Patty does most of it now because of my back and stuff, but thank you, honey. Because Bob Shaw, his common name, was a Depression-era baby, he learned from his parents the value of making things last and only buying something necessary as a last resort. For instance, he finally bought a Sears tractor with a mower attachment after he and my older brothers had been mowing that 1.5 acres for 8 years with a push mower. It takes 2 days, basically.
Video okay?
No, not that bad.
Oh, yeah.
It had a gas engine and it was sideways. He also bought a snowplow attachment for that tractor, which that was great because we had a 120-foot driveway. And that was one of the main reasons he bought the tractor, was because that winter was the time we got 2 feet of snow. And so digging out a 120-foot driveway with 2 feet of snow on it, all 6 of us were out there shoveling for 2 days. So after 15 years, that tractor started blowing head gaskets. At the beginning, it'd blow out one every 2 years. Then it was every year. And he replaced head gaskets for the next 10 years until he finally gave in and bought a used tractor. Can't get new if you can get a used one. And he only did that because the gaskets were blowing out twice a summer. And it's several hours to change the thing. Another thing I learned from my dad is that you can fix anything if you put your mind to it. Do some research and have the proper tools. He taught me to fix those head gaskets, and I replaced 3 of them by myself. Because it's like, get that lawn cut, but the lawnmower's broke. So fix it and get that lawn cut. So because of him, I have also changed a truck water pump and done brake jobs twice. Fixing cars is another thing I have willingly left behind, like vegetable gardening. One of my adjustments to his teachings is, if you don't like doing it and can afford to pay someone else to do it, find them and pay them. I still fix some things around the house, but not like he did. Now, that house they built in Livonia, they eventually sold it and moved because a developer wanted to build a subdivision and use their acre and a half as part of the property. And because he was a brother of a Livonia city councilman, there was you can't refuse. I don't know if the mafia was involved, but it was a similar situation. So rather than tear the house down like the developer wanted, the building contractor moved that house 3 miles east to Redford because he thought it was so well built. My dad and his brother watched the whole process of them putting on a flatbed truck and hauling it down 7 Mile Road. I was working. I would like to seen that. So another thing that I learned from my dad was to put as much quality as you can into the job or project, but you have to finish it in a realistic time frame. Done is better than waiting for perfect. One thing that Bob Shaw didn't learn until he was retired was to express emotions other than anger. He didn't even express anger that much, but when I put myself into Brighton Hospital to get sober, he learned that he had emotion-expressing options. My parents were asked to go to a couple of family counseling sessions so they could understand the disease of alcoholism and learn why I was there as an inpatient. After a couple of weeks, we had a joint counseling session so they could ask me any questions that they had, and I would have the same opportunity. They didn't have any questions, partly because my dad was director of public works for several communities, and so dealing with human resources, he dealt with employees with drinking problems. My biggest issue at the time was that I wanted my dad to say he loved me. My mom had done it rarely, but my dad had never expressed any affection to any of us boys. At the counseling session, my counselor said, "David wants to hear Bob say he loves him." My mom interrupted and said, "That's ridiculous. Of course he loves him." My counselor said to her, "Jane, David wants to hear from Bob that he loves him." My mom interrupted again. "That's just silly." My counselor said to her, "Jane, if you can't be quiet, I need to ask you to leave." "Bob?" My dad said, "David has a lot of potential." So the session ended, and my counselor and I had a review session immediately after that. He told me that my dad had never learned to express affection to anyone except his wife. He wasn't taught that by his parents or his role models, so I couldn't expect that of him or ask it from him because he was incapable. That was actually freeing to me to learn that if something isn't possible, to just let it go. And writing this yesterday, I realized that that was another lesson I learned because of my dad. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't something he was proud to pass on, but he was still involved. There's an addendum to that story, by the way. We would have family visits on Sundays at Brighton Hospital, so my parents, my siblings, and their 2 children, my nieces, would come to visit. After the family counseling visit, my dad, for the first time, hugged both his granddaughters. They were 4 and 2 at the time. He then went on this hugging rampage, and that is the correct word, hugging everyone he knew when he saw them. He would give women, after a while, he would give women side hugs, sort of side hug. And that continued until he passed. But after a couple weeks of hugging his male friends, they started to question his sanity. So he ended up giving them a hearty handshake and a pat on the shoulder. An example that he still hadn't mastered compliments before he passed was when Patty and I bought our home. Instead of hiring an inspector, we asked my dad, again a director of public works for several communities for decades, his brother, a union carpenter for 30 plus years, and Patty's dad, an architect for 50 plus years. So we said, hey, why spend money? We can have all these experts look over this house. So we all walk in the front door with our buyer broker, and my uncle says to Patty's dad, Jim, look at this great slate entrance. Then Jim says to Herb, my uncle, Herb, look at these plaster cove ceilings. They don't make them like that anymore. This was the model house for this sub, started in January 1955. So it was aces. We proceeded through the house with Herb and Jim complimenting features left and right. Then we went into the basement, where our 6'6" buyer agent pointed out the 8.5 foot height of the steel support beam. I guess that's a big deal because in many basements it's only 8 feet or even 7.5. So he could stand there and go like this and not hit the subfloor. While they continued to gush about the poured concrete walls, one of the first subdivisions in the world with that construction method, and other crazy things to me, Patty and Bob went back upstairs to the kitchen. Patty turns around and asks him, well, Bob, what do you think? Bob said, it'll do. As I said, he still hadn't mastered compliments. Okay, they want me to say it. That's another lesson, is you always have room to grow. We're never finished until we're on the other side. And I'll wrap this up by repeating the other lessons that I mentioned. Some of the ones I've learned from my father. 1, love of gardening and the outdoors, but those are stories for another time. Be conservative with your purchases and fix things yourself when you can. Put as much quality as you can into the job or project, but you do have to finish it in a realistic time frame. Done is better than waiting for perfect. And to learn that if something isn't possible, let it go. That used to be a hard one for me. There are many more lessons and stories, but I can share them at our delicious potluck after the worship service. Because like I said, there's probably another 45 minutes worth of stuff that just came to mind in the last 2 days. So thank you for your time and thank you for your attention.